Today's guest is Jonathan Brill, futurist in residence at Amazon, inventor, strategist, and the #1 ranked futurist in the world according to Forbes. Jonathan has advised the US Secret Service, led innovation at HP, and helped bring to market more than 30 products, 350 products that have generated tens of billions of dollars in revenue. Incredible. Now, he's here today to talk about his new book, AI and the Octopus Organization, co-authored with Stephen Bunker. And in it, he makes a provocative argument that most companies are deploying AI into dysfunctional systems. And unless they redesign their organizations to be adaptive, decentralized, and resilient, like the octopus, they're doomed to fail. So this isn't just a metaphor. It's a call to build super intelligent firms that can sense, learn, and act with agility. Jonathan, welcome to the Super Creativity Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's exciting to be here with you today. So
now,
let's get into it.
You've advised some amazing companies. You've advised CEOs, boardrooms, Secret Service, phenomenal. But I wondered why, when I kind of got this book and I kind of opened the book up and started going through, I thought, why in this moment of all moments is the answer to AI transformation an octopus? So tell us an octopus.
So what we've been doing over the last 25 years in business is we went from this world where we had strategy and then execution to a world where we started doing it at the same time. Agility, continuous delivery, you name your project management fad. We're now moving into a world where, I don't know if you've noticed this, but we're often having to execute before we have a plan. And in that world, the people, the operations, the things going on at the edge of the organization need to be able to innovate, create, deliver value, new value in ways that they never were required to before. And at the same time, we have a second problem, which is when everybody does what they want, you have no coordination and you kind of have a corporate heart attack. And so we've got to figure out how we're going to balance these two things. The way I think about it is this. In the 19th century, we built the modern organization. They weren't always designed this way, with a board of directors and a CEO and everybody down below kind of doing what the people above said. That was an innovation due to the age of the railroad and the realities of that time. It was also built on the great man theory of the 19th century, that there is a big man, a big brain at the top that tells everything else what to do, that shapes the future. In nature, there are other ways of looking at intelligence, decision-making. We have a centralized mind. The octopus has a distributed mind. Something crazy happens when you really look at how an octopus makes decisions. Each tentacle actually operates, innovates, creates, explores on its own. If a shark bites off a tentacle, that tentacle will go out on its own and attack the shark. It's able to think on its own. And so what happens most of the time with an octopus is the tentacles go out and explore. And then there are kind of tentacle brains. One at the shoulder of each, actually they're called arms, not tentacles, weirdly. And they communicate with each other. So what happens is each tentacle goes out on its own, talks to the tentacle brain, says, hey, I found something. Those tentacle brains talk to each other through what's called a neural necklace and decide what they're going to do. And that's why you see that crazy ballet where an octopus moves from randomly tentacles moving around to suddenly coordinated. And then they tell the big brain what they've just done. So instead of communications, command control communication going from the top down, it actually goes from the bottom up. That doesn't mean that the big brain in an octopus isn't a part of the decision-making process. If it sees an issue, it will take over one of the tentacles and guide it to help it figure out what it needs to do. The other 7, though, will be doing their own thing. They'll give up control. So this idea of distributed intelligence, distributed decision-making, doesn't mean that you lose control as a leader. It means that you need to organize in a dramatically different way. in the academy, we've been talking about this for 3 decades now, and you've seen fads. Teal didn't really work, which we had. We've had a range of these things, these distributed decision-making tools. And the challenges have been that it takes too much energy for the leadership, or it's not fast enough, even if the quality of the decisions are better. This is an interesting thing, because what we believe is that artificial intelligence is going to do 3 things in organizations that make this type of working, this way of working, far more possible.
This reminds me a little bit, this idea of, I mean, basically what you're talking about here as well is kind of biomimicry, is kind of learning from nature here as well.
Very much.
I was doing an event recently in Singapore, and I was talking to a gentleman actually who worked in the defense industry who works in biomimicry and design. And we were having a nice conversation about the worldwide wood, that, in a woodland, when a tree gets sick at the end of a field, the other trees are sensing under the subsystem and figuring out that tree needs a little bit more nitrogen, or at least a little bit more something else. Is able to do that as well. So as you kind of get further into your book, this idea of sensing, and so that role of that kind of top-down strategy versus execution, it kind of gets flipped a little bit, but there still needs to be those kind of guardrails, because obviously we are talking about artificial intelligence here. It's not something to be completely taken for granted.
Absolutely. So I think there are 2 things, right? One is, if you've ever managed a project, what you know is that you do need controls, because people we're still apes, and we still want to run around and do our own thing. So, like, how do you manage that? There's the realities of that, and then there's the realities of what AI can do that was really hard or really expensive before. Richard Coase, the economist, talks about transaction costs. When the cost of internal coordination is below the cost of external transaction, that you end up having these large firms, or you organize things internally as firms. If the transaction cost is lower outside than coordinating it inside, you have, you change the shape of the firm. You shrink the firm. My point being that AI is going to have a profound impact on coordination and transaction costs. What we're going to see is that AI is able to look at all of the information across your organization, all of the Zoom, all of the Otter transcripts, all of the Fathom transcripts, whatever it is across your organization, and help you understand who to talk to, what's going on, how to support. At the same time, it's going to help you make dramatically better decisions. We can get into the theoretical argument about whether AI will make better decisions than people. That's kind of irrelevant. The reality is that having a coach who can help you through making better decisions will help you make better decisions today.
Yeah, because obviously, as we know, and we see this you've done work at Amazon and these companies, you can have an organization full of Einstein level geniuses. And unless it's kind of arranged in a certain kind of way, that doesn't work so well. But before we kind of get into that, and we're going to go deep on the AI side, and we're going to come back to this idea of distributed intelligence, I want to come back to something a bit more to you. I mean, you're now the number 1 ranked futurist in the world, but you have this amazing background spanning AI, invention, intelligence work, product development, transformation consulting. Take us back a little bit. Where did this begin for you? And in this book, you talk a lot about ambiguity, complexity, dealing with chaos. Is there a story from your personal story that how you started to kind of navigate those things that you were seeing in organizations?
Yeah, so I had an amazing childhood. My father was an entrepreneur. His best friend was a toy inventor, of all things. And he really taught me how to think about, my father's friend, Steve Caney, really taught me how to think about what could be instead of what is. And he had success working, across government, working on large architectural projects, working in all kinds of fields. And he taught me really how to think about how to shape systems, how to invent systems, not just how to invent products. between that and my father, who was an entrepreneur, started several companies. I also ended up with that kind of desire to just go out and make stuff. And so in the two of these, in between the two of these things, I ended up with kind of a belief about the world that we can make anything possible that we can imagine. When I ended up in corporate America in my 40s, it turns out that this is not how the majority of corporate America thinks or works. And my job was suddenly to figure out how to take that growth mindset and help large organizations transform how they think, and how, more specifically, the junior people within the organization communicate what they see about the future so that it gets heard. And that's a lot of what I did at HP. Part of it was looking at economics. Part of it was looking at, social trends around the world. Part of it was looking at market dynamics and geopolitics. But at the end of the day, it was about communicating what's possible and how we as an organization can coordinate to make that new future a reality.
Because I know one of the things that we often hear when we talk about AI is this is going to help us become more productive. It's going to increase productivity, and that has a compounding effect on its over time, as well as AI systems become smarter and smarter, and the algorithms get better, and we have more of this. It almost becomes like water. We don't even think about it. It's just kind of part of what we're doing. I'm wondering, like, with the clients that you work with, how many of those conversations, I can think of what I hear from a lot of my clients, like how many of those conversations are in the efficiency side, like how can we, reduce overheads, drive some profitability in new business, basically just do the existing things that we do just now better, versus completely reimagining the business model or the way that it works. What is that split that you're seeing just now?
Yeah. Well, no one wants to reimagine the way they work because it works. The question is, how do we build structures in our organizations that allow us to adapt and to radical change? And the octopus is really interesting here, right? The reality is that the zebra doesn't change its stripes. Right. The reality is that we don't really change our DNA. Evolutionary strategies, especially in business, have a very poor success record. But the interesting thing about the octopus is it hasn't actually evolved for something like 300 million years. Right? Like, since we were still fish, if you believe those sorts of things. So what's it done differently? It doesn't change its DNA. It changes what's called its RNA, which are effectively the operating processes of a living animal, the way we produce proteins. As a result of this, you can literally take an octopus from the under the Antarctic ice shelf and take that same octopus and drop it in the warm waters of the Caribbean. And in 3.5 hours, it will recode itself to survive. And so what you want to do is ask, what are those operational innovations that you can make that will allow you to reorganize, restructure as the world changes? Not change who you are, but change how you work. At HP, we identified 5 major trends that would allow us to take advantage of disruptions independent of what they were. And we looked at a range of things. We looked at pandemics. We looked at a land war in Europe. We looked at denial of access to Taiwan, which is looking really important this week, given yesterday's takeover of Venezuela by the United States. We looked at a whole range of things that could disrupt the company. And we identified 5 operational innovations that would allow it to deal with any of them, right? One might be a little more important here, one might be a little less important there. There were things like work from home. So we had for 2 or 3 years before COVID, the entire HR department working from home. We had distributed our supply chain so that if something went down in China, it wouldn't be a heart attack for the firm. Like things that are individually obvious, right? But we just don't want to do them because they're a little expensive or whatever. But together allow the organization to outperform. So what we saw in the case of COVID was that you might think of HP as a computer company, but if you've ever bought printer ink, you know where the money is, right? It's in the ink. But literally sometimes, depending on the year, that water in there is worth more than gold by weight. It's an unbelievably profitable business. So HP is a printer company, more specifically a printer ink company. Our nearest US peer competitor is Xerox. In the lead up to COVID, Carl Icahn, the activist investor, was trying to force a lockup between the two companies. And then COVID happened, and something really interesting occurred as a result of the operational innovations that I'm talking about. Xerox saw a 69% drop in earnings per share, and it stayed there. Whereas over the course of COVID, HP saw all-time highs in terms of its margin, its unit sales, its market share, its revenue, its stock price, all-time highs. How can the two nearest US competitors have dramatically different impacts like that? It's a result of these operational innovations, thinking about how do we reorganize ourselves as the world changes? How do we not reinvent our DNA, but how do we shift our RNA to take advantage of that future?
And in the book, you talk about how you talked about the pandemic happening, but you also said that AI reveals an organization's culture more than it changes it. So it's like an X-ray for dysfunction. What's the most common leadership blind spot that you're seeing when companies are deploying AI today?
I think that there's a belief that this works like previous technologies, right? We're gonna sprinkle some AI on top and it'll be fine. The reality is that if you have a top-down organization and you sprinkle on the AIs, you're not going to get the benefits. And that's what we've seen from a recent report from MIT. There was some controversy about the methodology, but there's a lot of controversy about the methodology. But the underlying point was that 95% of AI pilots have failed. The ones that have been successful, and what is important is that we look at how we restructure our organizations and our cultures to superpower our people. At the end of the day, think about what's going on. We can argue about artificial general intelligence and superintelligence and science fiction and all that stuff. But what's actually happening is that your junior people with AI are dramatically smarter. And if you don't give them more agency, you're going to have a problem. By some metrics, what's happening is your average person is becoming better at abstract thinking than Einstein. When you take a look at metrics like ArcAGI, which measures abstract thinking in AI, this is a very interesting thing, because what we're suddenly saying is that we have an army full of Einsteins, and yet we're treating them like they're monkeys. Do you tell Einstein what to do? Or do you ask Einstein, what should we invent today? Right? Do you tell your people how to work and how to innovate when they know more about their marketplace and the situation than you do, and they now have the capability, the skill, the contextual knowledge to take advantage of it? It's this cultural issue that's going to be the key differentiator between the organizations that thrive and the organizations that fail. A couple of early examples. Lovable, the AI vibe coding software, fastest growing
Yeah, from
startup
Sweden.
in human history, Swedish. They grew from 0 to $100 million ARR in 8 months. You would have a heart attack if you did that as a traditionally led company. Up until they reached about $200 million ARR, they didn't have a sales manager. How do you do that? Your culture, the way you think about innovation, the way you think about closing deals has to be dramatically different. Looking at the US Navy, in the last 18 months, the IT capability in the Navy has increased its production by about 12 times. Let me repeat that. The most history-bound, command and control-driven organization, tops-down organization in the United States has increased by 12 times its production. You can't do that.
Yeah. But on that particular one, is that because it started from a very low base? I mean, you're in the west coast of
Sure.
California. You're
Sure.
very close to the city where they built all those during the Second World War. All those
Sure.
ships that were coming off the production line there as well.
Yeah,
I
Kaiser
can't remember.
shipyards are
Yeah.
700 feet away from me.
Like if you go back even 2 years ago, how many ships was the U.S. Navy producing or commissioning, let's say, in the U.S. versus what other countries, China and other places in the world were doing.
China's about 243 times the production capacity of the United States still.
But here's a question for you on that.
I'm talking about specifically IT production, not shipbuilding. That's a more complex. That's a different type of challenge.
On that particular one, then let's say and this could be for anything now, as we're talking about software companies or any type of business. Do you have a sense of, are we going to be moving to more of a triangle type of shape or a diamond? As in the triangle, you'll have just a very few people at the top and a much larger base, or is it actually going to end up being a little bit more like that kind of diamond where you just have a very small number of the people at the top, the people at the bottom? Actually, a lot of that work is being done by AI and agentic AI.
Sure.
So actually, the middle bit, what we used to think as general managers or middle managers, bizarrely, could that role actually increase?
So I think there's two answers to the question. A professor of mine at Stanford, Chaim Mendelson, I was teaching and actually I was that's the kind of guy I am. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to school there, and I'm also going to teach there in the executive program. So I had this. I was teaching, and he decided he was going to pull my intellectual pants down. He said, "This is really great. You're talking about what's going to happen in economic trends and whatnot. But as an investor, I care about two things: how much and how long. Right? How much are things going to change? How long is it going to take? I can't invest in one. I have to invest in both." And it was a great lesson for me when we think about what will the future of the workforce look like? What will the future of organizations look like? Eventually, I think that you probably end up with a world where there are, in many cases, a few people on top and a lot of AI production, right? It might be 80% of the work is digital and 20% is human. Where do we go between here and there? What happens over the next decade? It's a relatively open question. The data isn't completely clear. What we know is that companies like Amazon have made a bet that they will have very, very few people on top, a very, very thin middle management layer, and a very thick junior management layer. I don't know if that is the right strategy. What becomes possible, hopefully, is that those junior people are able to now do much more senior work, with AI tools, AI coaching, so on and so forth. We'll see if that happens. My personal belief is that there's a human development process that happens as you become a mid-level senior manager, where you need to learn things about life. There's a reason why our senior leaders aren't 26, right? Even when they are 26, the VCs certainly make sure that right below them is a 56-year-old, right? To help them actually make the hard decisions. And right on top of them is a board layer that is certainly not 26. Right. So you even in those places where in public you have Zuck, right, building Facebook, you have a lot of controls above and below. So
Yeah, you
I
got some
think
adults in the room, as they say in Silicon
suggests you
Valley.
need some adults in the room. That is correct. At Lovable, when they did their raise, everybody there is in their 20s or early 30s. And the only people who were really in the room were the father of one of the guys who helped actually structure the deal for the raise, because the kids weren't able to do it. And an executive at KPMG who is a friend of the family, and so on and so forth, right? But they were in the room helping make this thing happen. My point here is that I think there's a human development process that we all go through, right? And the goal of this process is to learn how to separate our experience of reality from reality itself, so that we can make more objective decisions, especially when we're stressed out. Um, you know, Typically it's in the West, it's the result of going through pain, right? Having a parent die, going through a divorce, having a health issue, having a sick child. Learning how to separate our experience of reality from how we operate our way through it. There are better ways to do this. In elite education, they teach kids how to do this because they have to run things much earlier in life, because they're going to become the elites of the world, right? You can't have a 30-year-old prince, acting like a 30-year-old. He needs to be able to think, move, work, feel like a 50-year-old. So there are ways to do this. My point is that if we're going to make these junior people much more accountable and deal with much greater abstraction, we need to actually accelerate that human development path too. So we end up in a world where you were talking about the triangle versus the diamond-shaped organization. I think the reality for the next 10 years is that it's going to be very much diamond-shaped, that you have a large middle management layer. Maybe those people are younger, right? But you have to have that human development path in order for people to put processes in place to think through complexities, to think through ambiguity, in ways that are investable.
And that kind of picks up on a kind of red thread that kind of goes throughout the book as well, where you emphasize quick feedback loops over grand strategies. That's kind of a recurring thing that I think you talk about in the book. So as we start to finish up here, what is one bold experiment you'd encourage a leader to run in the next 90 days to start becoming that kind of super intelligent firm, to kind of start increasing the pace, that those kind of quick feedback loops as well? What would be that one piece of bold advice, a bold experiment you would suggest to them?
I don't know if this is in the book, but here's what I would propose. I would say find a junior person, find an intern. And instead of you running the project, let them run the project and you be the intern. Why don't you reverse train? Why don't you reverse learn through this process? Because the reality is so much about what has worked in the past that it may be blinding you from what could work.
Yeah, it's almost like this idea of barbell mentoring. I watched a documentary last night about David Bowie, and especially the latter part of his life. And one thing he was very good at was putting himself into uncomfortable positions in terms of styles, genres, kind of going out, hanging out, like on the edges of scenes and new things that were coming. And he would try stuff, and Tin Machine, things like that didn't work. You could argue it failed technically, but the learnings that he made, they made that quick loop. Oh, okay, there's something here. There's something, I'm going to move that out as well. So we're gonna have a link to your book, AI and the Octopus: Building the Super Intelligent Organization, as well. If there was one other book by another author just now that's, I know you probably were gifted a lot of books maybe for the holidays, but if there's one book that you've read recently that has really kind of knocked you back sideways and made you think and made you reevaluate things, think differently, what would that book be?
There is a book, and let me. One of my favorite books is a book called Scale by Geoffrey West. So he's one of the founders of the Santa Fe Institute, an expert on the science of complexity. And he talks about how things operate differently at different scales. And you would think that would be kind of a weird, boring book. It blew my mind. Absolutely changed the way that I think.
Amazing. We'll put that link here as well. And if people want to find out more, we're going to have a link here for your book, but if they want to find out more about your other work, I know you do a lot of keynoting, consulting, other things as well. Where is the best place for them to go and do that?
Jonathan at jonathanbrill.com.
Easy. Fantastic. Well, AI and the Octopus: Building the Super Intelligent Organization is out now. Jonathan, thank you so much for being a guest on the Super Creativity Podcast.
Thank you so much, James. It's fantastic to chat.
You can subscribe to the Super Creativity Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. While you're there, leave us a review. I would really, really appreciate it. I'm James Taylor, and you've been listening to the Super Creativity Podcast.